I figured we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining. We really appreciate it. Got a good group tonight, both on the panel side, our hosts, our guests, and all of you joining. We really do appreciate it. So good evening. Welcome to the Conduct Detrimental Fall Sports Law Symposium presented by our Law Student Board. Thank you so much, for joining us for our first of the year. This is our second year of doing symposiums, and we're looking forward to another great panel discussion. With these, our aim is to just open conversation and continue having conversations with a lot of the experts in the industry. A lot of us on here tonight are majority, law students, some early attorneys in the field, and really looking forward to having a good conversation. Learning a lot about what goes on in pro sports specifically. We're going to be diving into the world of legal operations and relationships in pro sports, some emerging private equity investments, and just a bunch more tonight. So we really do have an incredible panel tonight featuring speakers across the soccer industry. So I'll let our wonderful host of today's panel, Bella Silva, give us a rundown of what we're covering and the student board. So, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all for coming. We do really appreciate your attendance and are excited that everybody's here. For those of you that are new or unfamiliar, Conduct Detrimental's Law Student Board is made up of law students who are from all over the country. Basically, we collaborate as a team to promote sports law topic like tonight's through the industry and just basically host events. So these events are for attorneys, business professionals, but also law students, like Mike had said. And now I'm going to pass it off to our moderators, Davis and Bridget.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight's symposium. My name is Bridget Boast. I am a 2L at the University of New Hampshire School of Law, and I am currently the Northeast representative on the student board for Conduct Detrimental.
And I'm Davis Bax. I'm currently a 3L at the University of Kansas. Thank you all for joining tonight, and I'm really excited to hear from Jake and Connor on some really interesting issues tonight. So I'm just looking forward to it.
So our panelists tonight are Jake Nicholson and Connor Oniki. Jake is the legal counsel at the National Women's Soccer League. His role is focused on team ownership, transaction oversight, and consumer products licensing. Prior to joining NWSL, Jake was an associate at Retzel and Andrus, where he specialized in corporate governance and middle market M&A transactions. He graduated with a JD and MBA from Cleveland State University, where he externed with the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission and an Olympic training facility. Connor has been a member of the URFC organization since its start, beginning as a legal intern in 2022 before transitioning into a full-time legal counsel less than a year later. He is a graduate of Harvard Law School. Prior to his start with the Royals, he completed a one-month legal internship in London with the University campus of football business, as well as a separate internship with the NBA in New York. He specializes in roster rules and regulation compliance, salary cap management, and all domestic federation and FIFA compliance. He manages the club's many agent relationships and also oversees its talent identification and scouting efforts. Thank you to both of you guys for being here tonight. So first, we're going to start off with questions relating to the topics of the symposium, and after we will take questions from the viewers. So to start us off, the first question, which either Connor or Jake you can answer, is how do you view the role of an attorney in a professional sports organization? So both personally and more generally for attorneys in the industry.
I can go first, Connor. Hey, everybody, and thanks again for having us. Yeah, I think generally speaking in the sports industry, the main role of an attorney is really risk management and bringing people together from a transactional side and kind of trying to find, I guess, the right fit for partners, while also protecting the interest of the league. I think intellectual property from a league standpoint on the commercial side is like one of the most, valuable assets it has. And attorneys, I think, can see a little bit further than a lot of times the partnerships team or a consumer products team might do, in valuing those assets and kind of building in things down the road that can kind of avoid some pitfalls that might otherwise be there. And then similarly on the risk management side, kind of being I guess the person at the bottom of the ship, kind of shoving the coal into the furnace, like making sure that all of the projects that people want to do, no matter how big or how small or how impossible they might seem or what roadblocks might be in the way, kind of figuring out the creative solution to get around those to make big events happen and to make a team successful.
Yeah, I appreciate you all having me. I think similar to what Jake said, I guess on the team side, it's pretty because we're often leaner groups, we cover pretty broad ranging issues. So you're doing stuff from, corporate side, sponsorship agreements, stadium use agreements, just a lot of the stuff that the NWSL has kind of organized and oversees for us to be able to do. And then you're also oftentimes leaning into some of the kind of FIFA regulations and those sort of things. And that was kind of moving over into the role that I'm in now. It was because I'd kind of been at the nexus of that. And so ended up shifting over because there's a really big need on kind of the actual business operations for everything that we're doing from an IP perspective, from, just the on pitch product, being able to bring that to life requires so much of that. And I think something that Jake touched on that I've just seen a lot is the legal department has its eyes on every department in a way that most other departments don't have their eyes on every other department. And so you're able to be a connector a lot in ways that other people just can't because the nature of their role is often more siloed. But because of what you're doing, you'll hear something in some meeting with the sponsorship team that connects with something that you're talking about in a ticketing meeting, but they actually haven't touched base on it. And so even though it's maybe not legal in function, our role of just making sure that everything's above board and staying aligned, we're able to kind of connect some of those dots that I think was something that I wasn't expecting, but has been really rewarding to be able to really liaise between the groups that you're working with and find ways to be able to make sure that everybody's kind of connected and on the same page as you're working forward to, bring out a certain product.
So you both talked about, so Jake is with NWSL and Connor, you're with the Utah Royals, correct?
Mhm.
So I'm curious, you both mentioned kind of your perspectives on it from a league perspective and a team perspective. I'm curious how the legal counsel for the teams interact with, the general office and vice versa, and what those relationships look like. How do you balance your team interests while also keeping in mind if the league might have, not necessarily competing interests, but different interests, and then the same thing from a league perspective.
Yeah, I think I'll be interested to hear what Jake has to say. I think that oftentimes like the team league frictions probably take place more at a higher level than whatever my pay grade is. So like I don't have I feel like things go really smoothly. The league supports us in a huge way and especially is we're going through agreements and trying to figure things out and navigate stuff. Oftentimes, whoever we're working with at the league, Jake or other lawyers, are able to give insights that they're seeing happening, trends in the market that maybe we're missing out on because we're only doing this deal the one time. And so they're able to provide a lot of insight. They have a lot of oversight in the kind of deals that we do. Just like every sponsorship agreement goes through them where they make sure that that we're connected and that it's something, they're comfortable with all the provisions in it and stuff. So you do have to work really closely with them to be able to make sure that that you're aligned. But they do a really good job. There are certainly sometimes conversations, especially more on the sporting side, I would say, where they maybe have to come down a little bit harder on us. On the legal side, it's usually pretty smooth, at least for us. Maybe Jake's gonna be like it's really frustrating and hard to deal with the teams, but the league does a really good job and has a really great team of lawyers. So I can't speak for every team to league relationship, but certainly in the NWSL, I think it's a really great legal department. And yeah, on the team side, like the operation space, we still work a lot with lawyers. So it's because the NWSL legal team is small enough, like the people that I was working with when I was legal counsel are similar to the people that I'm working with now. Many of the same people that I was having, review agreements and stuff, but it's over different issues like immigration and roster compliance and those sort of things, and some player care stuff just to make sure that we're all in lockstep. But yeah, it's as long as I found if you're overly communicative and really proactive in your communication, it can go a lot smoothly. And I'm sure Jake's seen that as well.
Okay, so for the next question, so with the expansion and also the changes within the NWSL as a whole and in the league, are there any legal issues that you see potentially arising from these changes in expansion?
Mm, that's a good question. I think just with any growing league, you're going to see a lot of issues that kind of come with just having a bigger market that you're trying to cover, having a bigger reach. I think the CBA, our CBA is really expansive in a lot of ways, in a pretty groundbreaking way. I would say that, um, but in ways that I still think is going to be stretched and still going to push things. And I think expansion brings more players into the marketplace. It brings more opportunities for teams and owners to be able to kind of have their say. So I think the player space is definitely an area to be able to watch, kind of. So like even the idea of not having a draft, while not like strictly legal in nature, is very much it was a union collective bargaining issue that came about because of that. And I think you're going to continue to see really unique ways in which NWSL just tries to continue to find its footing in international football. And because, but they're also the only ones that have like a proper union. So they, NWSL and MLS to some extent just have a really interesting place where they're playing such an international sport, more so than any other sport in the world, certainly that we play in the country. And but they also are an American league, so they're trying to navigate how to find balance within that. And so I think that we're still going to see some interesting things with that. Um, yeah, it's an interesting space. I mean, someone mentioned in the comments as well, like the betting thing that came about, like that affects every sport in a huge way. Not that particular case, and I'm not going to speak to that because that's not my area of expertise nor my sport of expertise, but the ideas around that issue have been a huge part of every sport and how we're navigating and safeguarding against that. And so it'll be very interesting to see what the response is of the different leagues to react to what just happened, because every sport, I think, has to look in the mirror at this point and say, what are we doing to make sure that we're hedging against things like this? So I don't know. I think that every legal issue that like we're seeing throughout professional sports is very prevalent in NWSL. I think that idea around kind of how our union navigates collective bargaining and how the league navigates collective bargaining moving forward into kind of even already what the next CBA is going to look like is certainly an area to watch, because I think we're going to continue to see ways in which uh, a CBA looks very different than any other type of CBA that we have in the United States, which is a really exciting thing. And I think to circle back to the beginning, like expansion affects that in a huge way, because the more voices that you get into a room, the more people that you get. And especially seeing that most of the investors that we're seeing now are not connected to other US sports, and certainly not any like US men's sports. We're starting to see more kind of away from that. I think that there's more people that are looking at women's soccer in America as its own thing, where they're wanting to navigate that differently and kind of see where they can be creative and what that can look like. So it'll be interesting to see where that all kind of trends toward.
You mentioned kind of the unique place that like soccer holds in sport being kind of an international thing while also being an American sport. I'm curious as far as like player management, like the transfer system in soccer is like a little different than kind of the trades in like an NBA or NFL.
Yeah.
I'm curious like what kind of like legal issues are like coming up when I don't know the Utah Royals roster structure. I don't know if you've brought anybody in from, a different country, but like what are kind of the legal issues that come up in those types of situations?
Yeah. So that's, I mean, another point is like NWSL is the first American league that's provided that all trades have to be with player consent. So like that very much, like that's the standard throughout Europe. But in America that's very foreign. And so that like even being a part of it is like as much about player care and player safety as it is about you don't want to bring in a player from England who then can get traded against their will. Like they're then opting into a system that's completely different from what they're doing just because they signed with one team. And so I think that the league was trying to say, okay, we are an American sports league, but just because we are, that doesn't mean that we have to operate in the same way because if we want to be looking at top talent, because the NWSL is also really interesting because it is a top, if not the top women's soccer league in the world. Uh, not to throw shade at any other leagues, but like MLS is competing and competitive, but I don't think anyone would say it is the top or top two league in the world. And I think that I can comfortably say it's a top NWSL is a top two league, and I think people would argue that it might be one, depending on how you kind of view what the top league is. And so that also puts us in a unique space where we want to dictate the market a little bit, but we also want to be really respectful and like cognizant of how it fits in. And if we want to maintain our spot as a top league, how do we need to fit into things that the rest of the world is doing, and how do we also need to kind of be unique and provide something that's different? And so I think that the player consent part of it was one where the league felt that it would actually benefit them to have something that was more modeled after a typical transfer system than otherwise. We have brought in a lot of international players from a lot of different leagues, different federations, and those sort of things. I think that luckily, like we have to do a lot of immigration law stuff. We work with an outside firm for it, but I've learned more about immigration law in this job than I probably ever thought that I would. Just in, especially in the last few months, I think that I've continued to learn even more. And so, yeah, that's like a huge piece of it. That if you don't know immigration law, you're going to learn immigration law. And luckily, we've had some really good people in house who've been able to help with that. Um, but yeah, that's like really a huge part of it. Because even once you get the transfer done and you're doing those things, like the actual piece of the transfer work that FIFA does is pretty manageable. Like you don't need a law degree to navigate that. It's helpful probably just to be able to make sure, all of your ducks are in a row. But then once they're signed to you, you're kind of then working with the league to be able to get all the immigration stuff done. So that's another piece going back to the first question is like we have to work really closely with the league on those because it's through the league because they're signed to the league, not to our team. And so the league is managing all of the immigration stuff, but then we're helping with all of the underlying work. And so that's a huge issue that I've had to really get up to speed with in the last year and a half, just making sure that I'm consistent with all the trends and all the different regulations that are coming in and that have been changing over the last little bit. So from an international piece, I would say that's the most complex. A little bit of the FIFA stuff, but that's very pseudo legal in what it is. But yeah, definitely the immigration trends and regulation changes over the last year have been pretty substantive. So yeah, just making sure that we're on top of everything.
I don't know if we were able to get Jake back, but
I'm
if
back, and I
oh,
apologize. I
awesome.
had a computer update occur at a very inopportune time, and it just
No
kicked me right
worries.
off. So you got me on the phone now, and thanks for your patience, everybody. Sorry for leaving you hanging there for a second, Connor.
No, no, I'll have a computer update in a little bit.
Yeah, please do.
Once I
Please
get,
do.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so for the next question, we talked about MLS a little bit, and I'm a big MLS fan, have been for like years now, and I think it's really interesting to see how much the league has expanded, I would say, especially with the high profile players, like Inter Miami having Messi and everything. So I'm curious how this has impacted the league and if there's any new legal aspects that you've had to deal with.
I can speak to that, Jake, if that's okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things with the Messi piece specifically has been ticketing. With him not always being healthy or traveling or whatever it may be, you'll see uh, teams that sell out in 20 minutes or whatever, and then he ends up not going there. And and how teams have navigated that. We haven't personally had to navigate that. Shockingly, the MLS has not scheduled him to come to Salt Lake yet. We'll see if that gets on the table, but we're used to being a small market, so we'll see what happens. But just in conversations that we've had with team council, it's a very real thing because even though um, you might not have to. You might not be obligated to do anything. You know that you have a fan base to appease in a lot of ways. And so how do you carve out ways to be able to like provide for those fans when they're making decisions based on different things? So you've probably seen things in the public that teams have done where they've done like a buyback program where you get a free ticket to that in another game or whatever it may be if he doesn't, and like it's just kind of a weird thing where it's like this unspoken thing of like we want you to come and support us, but we also recognize that with these talents coming, like that's a big deal. Like I was at the RSL game when LAFC came and Heung-min Son was there, and it's like the growth of the game is really exciting, but you also want to make sure that like you're building fan retention in a way that's organic. So like you want the people that are in the building to want to come back to the building. And so even if something doesn't go the way that you wanted it to go, are there ways that you can provide and this is, as business as it is legal, but are there ways that you can hedge against anyone coming after you and saying that they were promised a product that they didn't receive? Because even though we know that it would probably hold up, they bought the ticket, knew the risk that they were taking, there are opportunities for you to like build goodwill in the face of like a really difficult circumstance. And so I think that a lot of teams have really tried to take that approach. So that's like the first thing that I thought of. I think that like the Apple TV deal is really interesting at this stage just because of where the league is going and some of the signings that they've had and even just the last few months, but they're kind of capped in the way that they approached their TV deal. So that'll just be a space to watch, I think, of like how they try to grow that because NWSL and MLS signed their TV deals at about the same time, and NWSL was really, and Jake could speak more to this maybe, but like NWSL, I think did a really good job for a league that wants to continue to grow its fan base. They made themselves like any TV station that you watch, like for sports, at some point this season had an NWSL game on it. Maybe not every NWSL game was on it, but at some point ESPN, CBS Sports, Fox Sports, like so everyone had an NWSL game on it at some point, more than that, but certainly one. And so if you're a sports fan and you're turning it on, you're seeing NWSL. Whereas MLS said, we're gonna have all of our games accessible in one place. So you only have to pay one fee and you can see everything, but it's all going to be here. But if I'm a fan who's not an MLS fan, and you're trying to capture that, it's a little bit harder to go out and capture the new fan. So it's just been interesting to see the two of them go simultaneously because I mean we've seen some of the numbers on it. Like NWSL has had really good viewership numbers over the last year, and I think that that's a credit to the deal that was struck because there's just a high level of accessibility. I think that there's benefits to the Apple approach. Like if I'm a diehard NWSL fan, it's really hard to get, you're paying for a lot of subscriptions to get all of the games for the team that you want to watch or all the games of the league. Whereas with Apple TV, you can just get it all in one place. So it'll just be interesting because I think that MLS is growing and still continuing to grow. And so I'm just curious to see how they approach their next deal and what that looks like. And if they make changes to be able to try to find ways to continue to grow that audience, or if they double down on this and feel like this has been substantively sufficient to be able to kind of maintain their growth, but also, maintain revenues and profits and all those sort of things.
Yeah, I'd agree with Connor, and I think it's a great point. You know, comparing and contrasting the two strategies that the leagues took, especially with Messi in particular, and him being a draw himself, like having everything in one place and having something that's accessible, worldwide. It makes a lot of sense in terms of everybody showing up to one particular place and viewing from there and being exposed to the league and becoming a fan that way. Whereas at NWSL, like he said, it was spot on. Like and our commissioner Berman will say it all the time, like on Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, on all different types of networks, they're finding a way to reach different fans, whether it's ESPN or CBS or Prime or Scripps Ion. There's just a lot of different avenues that kind of reflects, I think, the stage that we're in as opposed to the MLS, where we're really focused on bringing in as much of the audience as we possibly can.
Kind of keeping on the theme of like just kind of the growth of the leagues. Like, how do you, maybe this is more of a question for Jake, but how do you, as an attorney, like, what are you thinking about when you're, you know, negotiating or writing contracts or working with outside counsel? Like, how do you think about the growth of the league when you're making decisions now, but they're gonna affect the league for, 3, 5, 10 years?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's a really important thing at the league level to have kind of an entire group of people dedicated to the long-term vision of the league. And like in our case, internally we have a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, extending out to long term and what we want the league to look like. And a lot of our annual goals, whether it's the marketing department or legal helping with other departments reaching theirs, like they all kind of they're all in furtherance of hitting those benchmarks that are going to get us where we want to be later on. And when you look at something like um, even the league rules year to year and the commercial guidelines that Connor would be familiar with, because we kind of set up how all the teams are allowed to operate and how their sponsorships are allowed to flow, even things like what the training facility requirements are, and how players in the league can interact. Like those are things that we have to constantly be changing year over year, and they're always updated with inputs from all the different departments that touch it, from broadcast to player affairs to game day operations and marketing, but then also input from the clubs themselves, because a lot of the things that come up each year, like we're dealing with issues of first impression for us, things that either we didn't think of before, or maybe we have an expansion team coming in that's just a totally fresh set of eyes and a fresh set of ideas, and they're going to build a stadium that's a little bit different than all the other ones in the league, and we need to account for that somehow. So everything is adapting as we go along, and there's a lot of building the plane in the air, so to speak, but at the same time everything we do is kind of in furtherance of the benchmarks that we're setting for 3, 5, 10 years from now, of how many teams we want to have, how big of a league we want to be from a revenue standpoint, what kind of partners we're looking to have, what categories from a sponsorship standpoint we're going to reserve for the league versus for the clubs themselves, and what kind of is the most efficient way to build value overall for all of the clubs.
So talking more about ownership, I think in soccer especially, I found that a lot of the ownership has changed, and I think it's evolved too, especially with on the topic of Inter Miami, like Beckham is now a co-owner. So how does the ownership structure impact governance, decision making, and risk management for organizations, or does it at all?
Um, I can Connor, I think, could speak to it a little bit more from an individual team level, but for me as someone who kind of sees the ownership transactions across the league, and then also is interacting, I guess, more at the level of the different subcommittees of governors and the board. I think it touches everything, kind of how the team is set up. If you and to an extent, or to some degree, it's the same as any other business, really, where if you own a company and it's just you and you have 100% of it, it's your level of risk tolerance, it's your speed of decision making, your opinions that matter the most, right? And the more cooks you have in the kitchen, all of their preferences need to be considered too. And when you think about how sports organizations generally have just professionalized over the last 20 years or so, not just in their operations, but the type of person who is investing, given that valuations have gone up, and it's the person who has the ability to invest and get involved in a team, whether you're a former player or you're just a business person who has money separately, like that's kind of totally changed the environment of now. Things are a little bit more calculated. There are more resources dedicated to planning, and more influence is given to subject matter experts as decisions are made. And it changes the entire dynamic of the league, I think.
Yeah, I would just say like you're seeing companies like Arctos and stuff that are focused on holding in as many leagues and as many teams as possible, and not necessarily having decision making power, but being able to analyze and take information from those teams to help all of them run more efficiently, govern more efficiently, those sort of things. And so yeah, I think to Jake's point, it just seems that it's become professionalized and corporatized in a lot of ways. Like we're not seeing just as many single owner companies or families. And even if they are that, that's often just a kind of face for what's a lot of pretty heavily uh, some heavy corporate groups underneath that are really flushing all of those things out. So I think it's positive for a lot of reasons because it's a lot more sophisticated. But to Jake's point, there's also probably a lot more cooks in every kitchen now, which leads to some difficulties in decision making at times, just depending on the corporate structure. But that's kind of the cost that you take for the payoff of being pretty sophisticated decision makers that come into the board meetings and those sort of things.
Jake, this might be more towards more your area, but how do you manage balancing the interests of different, I don't know I don't remember how many teams are in the NWSL now, but how do you manage the balancing the interests of all the ownership groups when making decisions about, you mentioned IP earlier, or any of these league-wide issues when the teams have their own interests, but also making decisions that are workable for the entire league?
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that we share the same goals, and me and Connor both said it a lot, but NWSL in particular is still in kind of this growth phase where we're focused on the bigger picture of creating a healthy league. And with the clubs, um, I mean, we're balancing our ability to sell league-wide sponsorships, and we're hosting the championship and things like that, and we're running our own business in a way, but at our core, we're a service department serving the clubs and their owners who are all overseeing everything that we're doing. So yes, I mean there are times where we're going to disagree with an individual club on a particular rule or maybe a sponsor that they want to sign that conflicts with like a national category, but at the league, we're always kind of looking at things through the lens of how can we make the clubs as a whole more successful in the long run and still maintain processes that are sustainable for the whole. So, I mean, hopefully Connor feels the same way, but it, we're focused on creating, I guess, processes that can be used across the board, because when you get into an ownership situation, I think, these are people who own teams. A lot of times they've been very successful in their lives, and part of the strength of having a centralized governing system is, yeah, they, some owners may come in and want to change rules, but there has to be, across the entire spectrum, kind of a leveling of the playing field with all of them, that kind of keeps everything grounded and keeps everybody on the mission of the larger league growing.
So looking at private equity, so what are the primary legal issues that you see arising out of private equity involvement in professional sports?
I can go on this one, Connor. Yeah, I think we're past the stage of kind of thinking there could be any like real inherent issues with the idea of private equity investments. Like we're never going to get to a point where a league is, kind of reversing course and turning around and banning private equity, or, there being like a Supreme Court decision where an individual investor of the team is challenging the legality of a private equity investment. But an area that I think could could probably create some conflict in the future, that's just kind of like a more broad space, is the level of control and information rights that a PE firm has, and kind of not only the information that they have in regard to the team, but also the team in regard to the PE fund and the league in regard to the PE fund. And it's all, based on the structure of the PE fund, but typically you'd have like one general partner in the fund who oversees how the fund invests all its money, decides how it's going to vote when it comes to management decisions, things like that. And then you've got 50, 100, 1,000 limited partners who are just contributing their money and along for the ride, and they're not really, involved in any decision making. And as a league in particular, but also at the team level, it's really important to know who all is invested in your league. Because if somebody has 0.0001% of a team and they get arrested, like the headline still might read NWSL owner goes to jail, right? So visibility is really important for the league into what's going on with the PE fund. And then the PE fund, especially if they've got a lot of ultra high net worth limited partners who really value discretion and privacy, they're often going to be hesitant to give that information to begin with. And then when they do, again, if there's 50, 100, 1,000 limited partners, it's not really going to be practical to do like a background check on all of those people like a league normally would with an individual investor and have them submit an application where they're disclosing, every business interest that they have. So the deal that kind of appears is the league say, okay, generally speaking, we're just going to focus on the general partner of this fund. You can invest with this larger pool of people, but sensitive information is going to be siloed off from them about the clubs or the league. And you have to be the point of contact for decision making going forward. We're going to vet you. And then all those limited partners are going to be treated as more, I guess, like true institutional investors. And everybody's kind of accepted that, but it gets tricky when you start to play it out and you apply the rules that the leagues have had for a long time for individual owners or family office owners, where, there's a question of like, well, if a fund invests in another sports team, like, Connor mentioned Arctos, like if they're investing in another sports team or a company that competes with a league partner, like, does that violate the non-compete agreement that all the owners would sign up to when they joined the league originally? And really, like, who even is subject in that group of limited partners or general partners to the non-compete? What if there's a limited partner who doesn't even have a say in whether the general partner chose to invest in this team and they have a separate investment with another team in the same league? So each team has its own rules that are kind of stemming from these questions, and they largely have addressed them. But as time goes on, just knowing how wide of a net PE firms are casting and how, I guess, the ability to become a limited partner is continuing to get easier and easier, and the more access is being created for people who maybe aren't ultra high net worth individuals to invest and have a very small portion of teams like this. It's, I think, naturally going to create some sort of new fact pattern that nobody's thought yet when it comes to applying these rules to individuals who are limited partners.
Yeah, like I think it's they're gonna have to develop somehow a cutoff where they say above this you're not like you're then subject to these rules or whatever, because yeah, to Jake's point, it's the barrier to entry is so low at this point to really getting involved with a lot of, and I say so low as like, I mean it is so low depending on the league or whatever it is, but even amongst, high net worth individuals, like especially there, it's pretty low barrier to entry. And so for them to be able to get in, like I think the leagues are just really going to have to, and maybe it'll come through, yeah, a fact pattern that no one's anticipating, and they'll say, okay, yeah, that was actually the edge case where we're not comfortable with that, and then we'll just have to, navigate from there. But it's just, you can even look at, I mean, we've talked about them now multiple times, but if you look at Arctos's holdings, like it's just hard to conceptualize exactly how many people are involved in touching so many different organizations throughout so many different leagues, and that's just one of these types of, firms. They're very sports heavy and sports oriented, but they've kind of set a model that I think a lot of people are following now, that it's just becoming more and more difficult to be able to conceptualize.
So kind of a more general question. What's maybe an issue, like a legal issue that you guys see, that isn't maybe getting as much, isn't talked about as much, or maybe you see kind of down the road becoming more prevalent that isn't very prevalent right now?
Given the news today, I would say gambling and integrity monitoring are certainly at the top of the list. But people are talking about that, so um, I don't know if that's one that we need to dive in on. But um, another area, one thing that I think is going to change a lot, and it touches, like Bridget said at the beginning, I do consumer products licensing for the league as well, and IP enforcement, and like catching infringement activities is something that I think over the next probably 2 to 3 years, but maybe 5 to 10 more realistically, but there's going to be a lot of leagues that are getting more advanced with this pretty soon. Like, AI is kind of working both ways when it comes to giving people, it gives people an easier path to create infringing merchandise and artwork that, includes league IP, but it's also giving the leagues and just like, companies generally software that's allowing them to catch those and like, monitor what's going on online and on like broadcasts as well, more efficiently. So there's just kind of going to be at some point soon like a much higher volume of these kinds of disputes, and also the more textbook legal question, I guess, of like, you know, what are the proprietary rights in an AI generated material too. But it's just going to be interesting, I think, to see how the different leagues and teams approach enforcement when they have all that information together. Because like when we see infringing uses now at NWSL, and as background, I guess I should say, similar to MLS and NWSL is a league where all of the league IP in terms of like the club logos and names, and also obviously the league shield and things like that, they're all maintained and owned by the league itself, not by the individual team. So like we handle enforcement matters for the most part, and they're flagged by the teams as they come along. But something that we talk about in the league office when it comes to this is like we need to balance the interest of enforcing our rights and keeping protections in place that aren't going to like diminish the value of our IP, while also allowing our fans to interact with the brands in a way that they want to, and kind of meeting them where they are, and just allowing the game to grow. So like for example, if you have a supporters group that's showing up to games and they've made a logo that kind of looks like a modified version of the club's logo, you're going to treat them much more differently than you are a major t-shirt company who should know better and has money to be paying you a royalty from the beginning and should have asked for a license. So everybody, I think, kind of makes that balancing call differently, but it's going to be something that comes out front and center for sure.
Yeah, I think from the team side, a huge issue that, I mean, it's been an issue, but I just think we're not even really digging our teeth into fully is like data privacy over the next, like, yeah, foreseeable future. I know Bridget and some of the stuff that you sent over initially, like talking about wearable tech and the way that, the way that teams take player data, I think is well managed, especially, and that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, where like the league manages or oversees a lot of our contracts, and that's to be able to help to ensure data privacy and those sort of things. But I just think that like the more expansive the tech gets, the more you're having to be concerned about the way that it's being used, whether it be player data, fan data, consumer data, all of those sort of things. I just think are all going to be subject to um, a lot of scrutiny over the next little while, if not beyond that. I think, especially kind of, Jake talked about AI. I just think many AI companies are really trying to get involved in the sporting space for all sorts of different types of data use and all sorts of different types of things. But I just think that entire like that whole space is an area that is ripe for legal regulation when it comes to like data use and data privacy, on top of the data issues we've already had. Now to be giving out your data to these companies that are then able to build upon that and take it and do who knows what with, in some cases, beyond what they're already doing for you as they're trying to continue to build out their models and the stuff that they're doing. So I just think that's an area that, while it's probably just a general legal issue that I know many people are exploring and already writing on, I think in sports, the sports is interesting because I think that they take kind of oftentimes pretty general legal questions, and then once you apply them to sports, there are a lot of niches and nuance to them that maybe haven't been considered because of how they're used throughout, different types of markets and different types of folks. And so I think that's an area that just jumped to the top of mind.
Not to blend me and Connor's points together in a way, but I think like, the data privacy and protections part of it is huge, and kind of going to the AI side of it too. It's like there are, there's going to be a lot more exposure, similar to how for IP enforcement, there's going to be these monitoring frameworks in place that, we can use from a software standpoint to help us. There's also going to be the flip side of it, similar to now how you might see a website where, if it's not ADA compliant, there are lawsuits that pop up related to that with, certain firms that specialize in it. Like from a data privacy perspective, as things get more automated, there's going to be a wider net of those cast, and it's going to affect things like sports leagues a lot more from a data privacy perspective, compliance, things like that.
So for a final wrap-up question before we head into the Q&A, and if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat right now. So what advice would you give to someone hoping to work in-house at a professional sports league, especially in a legal capacity?
I'm happy to go first. I think uh, I feel really lucky to be in the role that I'm in, and I think that hopefully you hear that from folks that like being able to work in this industry is you have to get lucky to a certain extent. And so I just always tell people like you don't know when the door is going to open, but like you have to be ready to put your foot in when that happens. Like the role that I'm in now, I had been interning at the club and then we were bringing the Royals back as an expansion team, and so my boss, who was the general counsel, became the president of the Royals. And so we hired a new general counsel. And because now we had an extra team, they wanted a junior counsel and they wanted someone who had worked, who had a connection with the club. And at the time, that was literally me. And so I could have done really great work any other time and I wouldn't have gotten a job out of it because even if I'd done phenomenal work, like they just wouldn't have been able to carve something out. But because of the timing of it, like I got lucky, but I had done good enough work during that time that when they were looking for someone and thinking about it, it made sense for them to bring me over. And so that's my pitch is like do good work, make connections, come to things like this so that you can make connections, like connect on LinkedIn so that we can be connected after. And like when those things come up, you can reach out and then hopefully like that's your chance to get lucky. But it also I just always want people to recognize like that means that everyone's timing is very different. So even if you're doing really good work and it hasn't worked out for you and you see it happening for other people, that just means that like their window opened maybe a little bit earlier than yours did, but it's not a mark of good work or good, connections or good. It happened to pan out in that way. So if you want to work in the industry, do good work in whatever field you're doing, find ways to connect that to sports law work, and then continue to network, connect, make, build relationships so that when the door opens, you can, get your foot in. And that maybe seems like, I don't know, high level kind of fluffy answer, but like that's the reality of it. Like every doing good work is a baseline, I think, to work in this industry. But there are lots of people who've done good work who just didn't get their chance. And so it's not like doing good work is somehow going to always set you apart. It's the expectation, but then you have to do the other things to be able to connect and be able to build those relationships and have those opportunities and they will come. So just continue to do the things that you're doing to be able to connect and find ways to be able to find your in. But don't give up the hope just because it kind of it hasn't happened yet at any stage in your career.
I couldn't have said it better, so I will co-sign everything Connor just said. You should also get a laptop that updates in sleeping hours, not in regular time hours. But um, it it really is like it's kind of the boring answer in a way, but it's networking to me. Like I can remember going to like the Sports Lawyers Association conference and other events like that in law school, and you go up to people and you feel kind of awkward or odd introducing yourself to attorneys who are like established in the industry, and you're basically saying like, hello, I'm Jake. I'm a 2L and I don't really have anything to offer you right now, but one day, like I might, and I would, like to interact with you and stay in touch. And it can be, like I said, awkward at first, and some people might not appreciate it, and it can feel like it's a waste of time in the moment. But those touch points, so long as you're doing them the right way, you're not being pushy or overly ambitious or having like false expectations. They do add up and they make a difference down the road when your resume comes across someone's desk when you're applying for jobs. And networking with your peers, I think, is equally important. My role to I guess buttress everything Connor just said, like my role at NWSL appeared because someone who I was the co-president of the Entertainment Sports Law Association at my law school with was already working at NWSL, and they had an unposted job that they were looking for somebody with an M&A background who could work on ownership transactions, and they were having trouble finding somebody for it. She reached out to me before I even knew it existed. And fortunately, I was kind of ready to jump on it when that moment came up. And I had been kind of maintaining a sports network for a while and letting people like her know that I was still interested, even though I went in a more traditional law firm path, like in getting into an in-house role in sports. And so everybody's going to have a different path, like Connor said, and you kind of just never know how the pieces are going to fall, but they are at some point.
Yeah, and I'll just say as well, like that same person that Jake is talking about was someone that in my I think it was my 2L summer. I was driving across the country for my 2L internship, and I had reached out to her on LinkedIn, and she was kind enough to have a call with me, and we talked about things. And I was at the time just planning to go to a law firm, and that was kind of like I didn't think that I would work in the NWSL. And now we've worked together on a lot of projects, and she's one of my main touch points at the league because we built that relationship. So that doesn't have to do with like job stuff, but it just is like you never know who you're going to be in touch with. And like a credit to her of just the type of person that she is, and like that she is that type of person that like networks and then looks to reach back and like put an arm around people who are really like trying to find their feet in the legal space. Like when I was first starting at RSL and Royals, I had no idea what I was doing, and I would call her a lot to be like, "What are other teams doing? What should we be doing with this?" And she would give a lot of really good insight. And so those connections can help you not just with like that initial getting a job, but even how you're settling into a job and what that can look like. And there are people that are ahead who are always going to be looking behind, and find those people. I always like joke, sorry, now I'm re-answering the same question, but I always joke that like when I was in law school, I just reached out to so many people on LinkedIn, and my mindset was like, if they're a jerk, they're probably not going to respond, which is fine. And also, if they're not a jerk, they might not respond. But like the people who do choose to respond are probably pretty good people. Like I had about 100% success rate of the people that I cold emailed or cold LinkedIn. The ones who reached back have been really nice and supportive because they're not going to do that. So it's like, if you reach out and they don't respond, because I know that people have probably reached out to me and I haven't been able to respond, and I hope that I'm not a jerk, but like some people are just busy, but then there are also probably some people who don't have any interest in helping and they won't respond, and that's literally fine. So like you're only putting yourself out there to maybe get responded to by really nice, kind people, and like it's a low risk. Like if someone is annoyed by you reaching out, they're probably not going to email back and say, why did you do this, what do you, they just probably won't respond, and then you move on with your life and it's totally fine. But there will be a lot of people who do reach back, who have the time and want to be able to mentor in that way and help, and like don't be afraid to find those people, because it's a really good way for them to kind of like self-select in. And sometimes they won't respond, and it's because they're busy, and you'll reconnect with them later and realize they were such a nice person, and that's fine. So you don't need to like cast broad generalizations about people who don't respond, but it's just a good way to like find people who care and want to reach back and connect. So yeah, I agree a lot with what Jake said. Just network it now, network.
All right, unless you have anything else, Jake, I think we'll move into some of the questions we got in the chat. Those are all great responses. So we have a question from Andrew. Connor, you mentioned learning a lot about immigration law in the last year or so. And Andrew's just asking about, how do you learn an area that's not your specialty? What's your process like, and how are you able to learn something that's an unfamiliar area of law?
Yeah, I talk to people who are a lot smarter than me, which luckily for me is very easy to find. A lot of people who are smarter than me and know that area of the law better than me. And so it's a lot of reaching out. Like we had a team admin who isn't a lawyer, but she had done she had helped to connect with the law firms that were doing all the immigration stuff at the last team that she'd been at. And so she helped walk through a lot of the processes. And then it was talking with our outside counsel and saying, hey, like, what is the process here? What am I missing? And just like going through all the steps to be able to do it. Luckily, like any area of the law that I'm having to learn, we usually have subject matter experts that you can lean on. So you're not like having to just start out. It's not like law school where you're like starting from scratch and like relearning everything. It's like you are learning the pieces that you need in order to function in the role that you're in. So like I'm by no means an expert on immigration law now, and I probably never will be, but I like know enough to be dangerous, and that has come because I've spoken with the people that like I'm trying to limit how much our outside counsel has to do, both from a cost perspective, from an efficiency perspective, for those sort of things. And there's plenty that I can do. And so it was about carving back out the pieces that I needed to be able to do. And so it was just a lot of questions. And so our first visa that we probably had to do probably cost us a lot of money because I was on the phone with our lawyers so much asking like, why did we do this? When did we do this? What did this look like? When did you need, when could I have helped on that? Whatever. But then hopefully since then it's tapered off where I now know the process and I understand how to be able to fit in with that. So it's just about being curious, finding the people who know more than you do, asking a lot of questions as you're going through whatever process it is, and then understanding the next time how you can do it more efficiently, and then hopefully the next time and the next time and the next time to where you have it kind of down as much as you need to.
I think the two biggest phrases I'll take away from what Connor just said is know enough to be dangerous and ask a lot of questions. There are no dumb questions when you're getting into a situation like that. And I guess something else Connor mentioned earlier about just the idea of as in-house counsel, you're seeing a lot of different things across the organization. Sports or not sports, like you become somebody who has to learn enough to be dangerous in a lot of different spaces really quickly, not just the law. And you're learning the processes of your finance department and other groups in your organization too. And once you kind of get into that routine of understanding that every day is going to be a little bit different, your mindset kind of just becomes, how can I sponge all this up to the point where I'm useful?
So we had a question addressing your point last time, Connor, about we were talking about Messi and how there's been issues where when he's not there. And so someone asked, do your sponsorship or investment agreements include any protection or requirements to reduce that risk when the league does lose their top players?
Are we allowed to do that, Jake? Do you know? I
I don't know.
I don't, I mean, from a team perspective, like we wouldn't want that. So I don't think that there is a situation like to what we talked about earlier. Obviously, we want to serve the fans and we have a relationship with our partners where like if they felt like the value of their partnership had been so depreciated because a player had left, like I think that we would in most situations be open to looking at like, well, what can we offer you to be able to like help get that value back up? Like, what does it need to look like? But by and large, like that's not we wouldn't initiate that because we would like it to stay static regardless of what happens. Even if we were to sign a good player like a star player like a Messi, I don't think that we would then go in and try to like renegotiate our agreements to suddenly be more. I think we would negotiate our future payments, but like, we I think we prefer consistency. So unless a team were to have brought that to us, or a partner were to have brought that to us, I don't think that we would have even entertained something like that. But in the case that they were to, I think it would be a lot more about like let's just continue to work together in good faith. Let's look at what this would look like. Let's commit to a term that you're comfortable with. So if that means it's only a year because you're not sure what it's going to look like next year, so be it. But if you're interested in committing to us long term, like we can continue to have conversations about the value that you're seeing in this agreement. But I'm sure that it's something that has been explored, but I would be intrigued to know, like, if push came to shove, what the MLS and NWSL legal departments would have to say about a team trying to implement something, because I just think it's a slippery slope and sets a pretty risky standard for what's allowable in those types of agreements. Like, if anyone got away with it, it was probably Inter Miami, but beyond that, I just don't know that a league would even feel comfortable allowing for that type of language. Probably. I don't want to speak too broadly for Jake or anybody else.
Yeah, I'm back, everybody. Hey, I'm on camera. No, and just kind of speaking more generally, I think that like part of the business risk of every contract, even from the league's perspective or from a team's perspective, is something going to change in the future, and you're basically placing a bet at all times. And going back to kind of the risk management piece of our jobs, it's like you're looking at it saying, okay, like NWSL, for example, is a league that's going to, hopefully have more teams in the future. It's going to get more valuable over time. Like all partners across the board, like there are things that are going to change between now and then in terms of amount of inventory for like games that are going to be on TV or just the number of stadiums and number of events that are held. Like as things change, I think from both sides, they're balancing the risk of what's going to happen there.
That makes sense. Thanks so much for sharing those. I'm going to read off another question that was asked by Luke. A prominent approach to league expansion is usually through academy systems. So, legally speaking, does collaborating with these minor players present more challenges than comparatively to the professional players?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I don't know if more of a challenge, but certainly a different challenge. Like a lot of player safeguarding stuff. We have a U18 15-year-old player. She just turned 16, I think. A 16-year-old player, and like navigating that has definitely been its own thing. And so I think it just requires a lot of buy-in from parents, from family, from staff to be able to ensure that like you have all the right safeguarding in place. I think if we were to start expanding out to like an academy, then you start dealing with it at an even higher level. Like our men's team has their academy, and so they have an academy manager and like dorm manager and a lot more dedicated staff to ensuring, safeguarding compliance and those sort of things. From our perspective right now, from a U18, it's pretty navigable because at most teams have two or three, and so it hasn't become it certainly isn't a tougher legal issue. It's just, a little bit more care on that, making sure that we're following all the safe sport protocols and ensuring that everybody's compliant there. But I think definitely as we start to explore what academy frameworks could look like, that's just going to have to be something that's like a dedicated staff member to oversee that. And we'll probably have a lawyer, myself, or someone else who is, kind of heading up the safeguarding approach and player safety issues.
Yeah, I don't have much to add because I stay focused on the transactional side at NWSL for the most part, and in this case, I'm thankful that I do. But I know that from from the league's perspective, like we similarly, it's just a resource question. As like we now have people who are dedicated to making sure that these policies are put into place and safe sport is followed and everything, and it'll just continue to expand as academies potentially would grow out, or just even just having more minor players, just across the league.
I think we've got one last question. So the WNBA is going through big debate about revenue sharing and player rights and stuff. How do you think that conversation, both the disparities but also just the visibility, affects the NWSL from a compensation perspective, league structure? Does it put pressure on the teams in the league to kind of rethink those kind of things? Just how do you think those conversations affect your league?
I
I'll let Jake talk about the
Yeah,
league.
I guess and apologies if it's a non-answer, but I feel like we're just in a different situation than the NBA WNBA would be, because our dynamics are different, right? Because NWSL is its own separate league from the MLS, and the governance structure is different. There are a couple teams that have owners like Utah who are in both MLS and NWSL, but we I think focus and given kind of the world soccer landscape, things are just a little bit different in terms of not only the compensation structures, but also the rights that players have. Connor talked about the CBA that we have in place now that has made a big difference. And then just more broadly thinking of, kind of the quote unquote old guard of U.S. women's national team players and the ambassadors that they've been for women's soccer generally and equal pay. And to have them all now involved in NWSL, I mean, not all of them, but like to have some of them be minority owners in teams or just like general ambassadors, broadcasters for teams still associated with them coaching. Like, I think that's played a big role in how our league has been successful. And it also kind of, I think, goes to show that with the league itself still growing and people still kind of seeing that big picture that I talked about more so with the owners and stuff. But like, I think that the players kind of feel that obligation too to kind of continue to grow and professionalize and build a stable league where, like the WNBA versus the NBA, like they're more attached at the hip and, it's a little bit easier to have kind of that kind of a dispute as opposed to us where we're a little bit more independent.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, as a team, we're we're just operating within kind of the regulations that we have, and so we're not dictating a lot of that. Obviously, like owners in the league are kind of in charge of what the compensation structure looks like. But I think one of the I don't know, just one of the maybe reasons for where is like we know that we're more than competitive with other women's leagues throughout the world. So like the broader pay gap question is one that is like a systemic issue that I think needs to be addressed, but it's difficult. Like FIFA and other and confederations and things are going to have to get involved in like a real way to be able to help to face that, because NWSL sees itself as like I think competing with a lot of the other international leagues as far as like what they're trying to do. And like not only are they matching, they're exceeding in most cases the pay in all of those leagues. And so it's like it's a difficult circumstance where WNBA, I think right now sees itself more closely because its only comparison is the NBA, like that becomes very clear. And I think that the pay gap is still very clear to teams and players and women's players throughout the world and for good reason. But it's just like an interesting it goes back to what we were talking about of like being an American league in a very international sport. You're like, we're trying to straddle that in a really healthy way. And like, we should be very proud of the pay that we're giving to the players relative to other women's leagues throughout the world. But then it's also like, well, what does that look like relative to men's leagues throughout the world? And like, how do we maybe get to that level? And I think that's like an ownership level question. And even like I was saying, Confederation and FIFA on the WNBA side, I think it'll be very interesting. Like something like Unrivaled could really disrupt that space, where then all of a sudden WNBA is not just looking at NBA, but also is looking at Unrivaled, and like that's going to become even more of a conversation then of like that. So I think it's going to take some sort of disruption, whether that be from a top-down perspective, from somewhere else, for like women's football as a whole to be able to like continue to lift. But I would say that WNBA is really, from a women's football perspective, doing what it can to continue to push things forward, to continue to push the pay forward, player rights, player like again, like I said, our union is one of the most progressive in history as far as like what it's doing for players and player opportunities and player stability and those sort of things. It's still not probably enough from like a cost perspective or a payment perspective, but those are questions that are going to have to be answered at even higher levels than just like the team organization or anything like that to be able to get us there. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it's like interesting to see where it sits within the landscape.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, Bridget, go ahead.
No, you're so good. I just wanted to, thank Jake and Connor for joining us tonight as speakers. It was really great to have both of you and to hear your insights about these topics and everything. And thank you to everyone else for joining and also your great questions as well.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I second that for sure. Thank you, Bridget and Davis, for organizing and putting on this panel. You guys did an amazing job, and obviously the panelists were very knowledgeable, and you both, Connor and Jake, gave some really great answers, and we're excited to share this with the rest of the Conduct family. So I just want to wrap up quickly before Mike says a couple of things. So Conduct is planning more of these symposiums to happen. Like he had mentioned in the beginning, this is our second fall symposium. So we're hoping to do a spring symposium and a fall symposium, as well as some coffee chats with some of the local law schools across the country. So thank you again. I'm just going to hand it off to Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you, everybody. Big shout out to Bella, Bridget, and Davis for all this, and of course our amazing speakers. Thank you, John, Jake, and Connor. I really do appreciate you both making time tonight and being flexible with everything. Yeah, please feel free to reach out via socials or email with any questions about tonight. We'll have an update on what will be available in terms of content, from tonight. As Bella said, yeah, we're always looking for everyone and anyone to contribute or create any sort of content in sports law. So whether that's contributors for the website, more specifically, obviously social media is always number one, but website, social media, podcast, things like this. If you think that your law school would be interested in hosting a coffee chat or doing some sort of collaboration, we're always open to those type of things. So don't have to be on the board to get your foot in the door and connect in situations like this and opportunities like this. So do highly recommend our email is always available. We sent the email the link, so please feel free to just reply right to that email if you have any questions. So thank you so much again for joining. We really do appreciate it, and hope everyone has a good night.